yeah.
Candid
I'm really excited for you to check out this interview.
Candid with Kimbra.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Today is an exciting podcast because I have another podcaster coming on. His name is Tommy Kovac. And he asked me to be on his podcast, and I had so much fun that I said, you got to come on my podcast. So that's how that went down. But originally he saw a podcast of mine with Tuesday Night, and he is a really big horror fan, that I know. So he really enjoyed that podcast. I've had her on a couple times, actually, and he's been following my podcast ever since. I didn't know much about Tommy until I was on his podcast, Splat from the Past. I know Tommy was a stand-up comedian before, so we're going to learn more about that and what inspired him to start his own podcast. And he seems like a really nice guy. He's very enthusiastic. I do know that. He's very enthusiastic. He's had a lot of guests. And please stay tuned to learn more about Tommy Kovac. Well, I want to welcome my very special guest, Tommy Kovac, from Splat from the Past, right? Splat from the Past. And, you know, just a minute ago when we were talking, now I remember what I was going to say to you. The audio, you know, I know your podcast is only audio and no video.
Right.
And I was listening to the last episode of Mark Maron, which we'll get to in a minute. And he made an interesting point, which I never thought about it that way. Because when I first started this podcast, everyone said, oh, you got to do video because that's what everybody wants now. But Mark was talking about how he never did video. One of the reasons was because then people can't cut it up and make little sound bites, you know, and it's harder to do with just audio. And to make it put a spin on your podcast. And I never really thought about that, you know? Is that why you just kept yours audio, or it was easier?
Not at all. When I started listening to podcasts in general, and just before I started my podcast, no, that didn't even cross my mind. I grew up listening to the radio. And so I thought to myself, he's doing his podcast like it's an old radio show, and I loved listening to it. Just the soothing sound of the radio, his podcast sounded like, and I was like, wow, I want to do something like that. So that's why I started my podcast audio only, and I love having it that way.
Oh, I know, so much easier. But I want to I've introduced you already, but how Tommy and I met was he had seen my podcast with Tuesday Night on it, right? And I think initially that's how you got aware of my podcast, right?
It was Tuesday, yeah. And then I listened to some more. You had Rich Scheidner and Joey Gaynor on, and they've been on my podcast as well.
I know. So, and then he invited me on, and we had, I was like, I think we did like an hour and a half, and I was like, I gotta go. And you were like, oh, she had to cut it short. I'm like, that's long for me. But yeah, I was reading a little bit about you because I really didn't know much about you until I was on your podcast, and we discussed that you'd been a comedian, and then when I was reading something you sent me, you said a failed comedian. But I mean, you didn't. How long did you really do it for?
Overall, 10 years. I mean, there were periods in there when I wasn't doing it at all because I had stuff going on in my life, but I mean, I had fun, actually doing it, but just, the backstage politics and all the backstabbing was just my least favorite part about it, And San Francisco, the place that I'm born and raised, I mean, that's not the place to do the kind of comedy that I did in this generation, which is very blue and very bawdy, and that's like my sense of humor. And they like, very witty and clever stuff, and I did have witty and clever stuff, but I don't know. They have very high standards in Bay Area comedy. So, that was just not, that was not satisfying after a while, and especially after I came back from my car accident, I was just very bitter and I said a lot of mean things and stuff, but it was just me getting through what I was going through at the time. It was nothing serious that I was saying, but a lot of people will take what they will from it sometimes. But yeah, overall 10 years.
Okay, so that's a good shot. Yeah, but like we discussed this on your podcast that to me stand-up comedy is like the scariest thing in the world because it's just there's no safety net per se. It's just you and the audience. And it's funny getting back to Mark Maron, and I know that was a common thing we discovered that we both loved Mark Maron, and he was one of my
Yeah.
influences too. I must say that I initially had a podcast called Kelly and Kimbra in the Moment. It was during
Yeah.
before COVID, I think it was before COVID.
I
And
heard I heard it recently, and I liked it. I thought you two had really good chemistry.
oh, thank you. Yeah, we did. That was her idea to do that podcast. And then, we ended up having different, let's say we wanted to go in different directions with our podcast. So she's got hers and I've got mine now. But so she initially got me into the podcast world, but I started listening to Mark Maron. And when I was on your podcast, you were saying that that was one of your big influence. That was your big influence. But I loved his podcast, and I listened to the last one the other day with Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And Barack Obama was saying, he goes, to me, being a stand-up comedian is like the scariest thing that and I was like, that's so funny because I feel the same way. Not being president, but being a stand-up comedian. But yeah, so that inspired you because you had been in that car accident. So did you have a problem? Like, did you have a bad drinking problem or you just,
Yeah. So the drinking started around 2011. I'd been working in the bar business for about 4 years up to that point, but never really drank much until then. And then things started going bad by that point to worse and stuff. Me and my mom got into a homeless situation by the end of 2013. And then early 2015 is when the accident happened. And while I was in San Francisco General Hospital recovering from this, I I discovered Marin's podcast in an algorithm search on YouTube because I had discovered Joe Rogan's podcast a few weeks before that. And so I listened to Marin's podcast and, I knew him as a comic. I never thought he was funny before that, but I think he's gotten a lot better. I watched his last special. It was hilarious. But as an interviewer, I
Tommy,
was like,
Tommy, Tommy, can
uh-huh,
you do me a favor and move a little bit more to your right? Because I want you to be more in the center. There you go.
right here.
Yeah, that's better. That
Yeah.
because when it's cut up, it'll look better. Yes. So you didn't think he was that funny as a comedian before the podcast, but you feel like he's gotten a lot better. Mark?
Yeah. Yeah, and as an interviewer, I was just like, oh my God, this is like back in the day when Dick Cavett had a talk show. It is just so candid, and celebrities are swearing, and they're talking about everything from suicide to depression to whatever. And I was just like, if I could have a podcast, this is what it would be about. Now, when I started my podcast 2 years later in 2017, I had a lot of fear in me because I didn't want to offend anybody.
Right.
And Marin's podcast was like the only real podcast that was doing that at the time. And so it started off as this shallowy kind of nostalgic podcast where I'm talking about the movies and the television from the actors that I worship and everything and stuff. But probably since the pandemic, it's gotten a lot more candid, and celebrities are now aware of the Candid podcast because there's so many podcasts now that are doing it and stuff that I don't have celebrities like messaging me after the interview and saying, can you cut that out, or I'm not going to answer that, and then I cut that out later and stuff. That hasn't happened in about 5 years now. Now everybody will just cut loose on my podcast. It's amazing how that's happened.
I know it's funny because I had someone on recently who I don't think some people still don't really know what a podcast is like. It's kind
Yeah.
of like I heard someone talking about it. Oh, it's actually the Mark Maron one, Barack Obama. They were saying how there's something grounding about just hearing people having a conversation, as opposed to like just interview question, you know? And
Yeah.
I said, that's so true. Because I really enjoy listening to people just having these conversations. Like I like Bill Maher's a lot too, the Club Random. I listen to that one as well.
I
But
do too.
yeah, but yeah, I had someone on who I don't think really knew what a podcast was or thought mine was going to be different, more like just promoting, you know. And
Yeah.
so afterwards, she was like, "Well, I don't know if I came off, you know." So I think she was worried that it was just too much talking about stuff. But that's what I like about, you know, personal things of her
Yeah.
journey to where she became. And I think that's what people like about podcasts because they find it interesting. It's like two friends talking and they're kind of eavesdropping, you know?
Yeah, and it's funny. There are more people out there than you realize who don't know what a podcast is in 2025 because I don't know, it has slowly creeped into the American zeitgeist, and there's a lot of older people who are just technology luddite, and they still don't know what it is, and you have to explain it to them. And I'm just amazed of how that's worked. But then there are some older people who are just absolutely hip, and they know exactly what it is, and they're just all in when you get them. You know, yeah, it's
Yeah,
an interesting phenomenon
I
that way.
know. I know it's seeped into like COVID probably had something to do with it because a lot of people were, you know, at home just doing nothing and listening to podcasts. And that's, you know, we had a lot of time to do our podcasts like you did. So, so anyway, you had this bad car accident and then you started listening to Mark.
Mark Maron.
Yeah. And you just discovered that you loved it so much and that you wanted to have a podcast like that. But then you had this love of horror too, right? You had the love of horror. Did that
Right.
happen before? Like, were you always a big horror fan?
Horror. Oh, let me tell you, when I was a year old, my parents showed me The Shining. They don't like horror themselves necessarily, but they love Jack Nicholson. And it
Sure.
was on HBO all the time when we first got HBO in 1984. And that's even though the movie scared the shit out of me, that's probably where the seed was planted. And then from there, I was allowed to watch the more family friendly horror movies like Ghostbusters and Gremlins. And then as I got my own television that had every channel, by the time I was 8, I was watching USA Up All Night with Rhonda Shear and Gilbert Gottfried and watching the horror all chopped up that they were showing on there. And then I discovered the Friday the 13th movies. I had already discovered Freddy a little bit before that because my brother was a big Fred head and stuff like that. Now, what planted the seed for me to start a podcast that originally started out as horror and sci-fi focused was I started going to horror conventions right after I got out of the hospital because while I was in there, a couple horror people I love like died around that time. Betsy Palmer, I think Marilyn Burns, Angus Scrimm, the Tall Man and Phantasm, they all were like passing away around that time, and I was like, I got to start going to horror conventions. That's a big part of the life changing thing that I went through with this accident. I was like, I got to go to horror conventions, and so I started
I don't
doing
go to
that.
horror conventions. My life will be nothing. No, you know.
Exactly, exactly. So I started going to horror conventions after that, and then the podcast was initially horror and sci-fi focused, and then kind of like with me getting out of stand-up comedy, I started to shift away from horror after the first year or so. I started getting a lot of weird things happening to me. There were like these creepy horror fans like friending me on Facebook and like messaging me at 2 a.m. saying that they wanted to talk horror with me, or they wanted numbers from certain horror people I've interviewed and stuff, including our friend Tuesday.
Oh my gosh. I know Tuesday probably got
She
the
went through
one.
that, and it was really creepy. I had to block these people and stuff. So then the podcast shifted away into me talking about everything that I'm all about: old Hollywood, classic television, classic rock, and stuff. The life journey, alcoholism, sex addiction, and just everything that I've been through myself. We have all these conversations, and I think I've been better off that way. But because it started out as horror and sci-fi, I will always be loyal to horror, especially during the months of February and October. Because in February, it's Women in Horror Month. In October, it's Halloween, of course. So I'm doing horror interviews all month long.
Oh wow, that's so yeah. Because when I was talking to my friend Jeff, I don't know if you know Jeff Kirshner. He's a good friend of Tuesdays, and that's initially how I met her. And I was
Uh,
telling him how I was going to be on your podcast, and he was like, "Oh, that's really cool," because usually he, has just horror people on. And I said, "Oh yeah, but I think he's shifted away. It's been a while since you've shifted." Um,
right.
so now that you broadened your horizons, you must like it a lot more, right? I mean, that you can just talk about anything.
Yeah, I mean, I started, when I started shifting away, I felt like I had a weight lifted off my head because I was trying to get some of the bigger names to come on during that period, and it was just wasn't happening. And then I found out later they either selectively do podcasts or they don't do them at all, or whatever. And so then once I started getting into other arenas, I started making a lot of friends that I still have to this day and stuff. And I just been so lucky and fortunate.
I know it's so interesting the people you meet on this journey, and
Yeah.
you've been doing it. How long has your podcast been on YouTube?
8 years.
8 years. Wow. So, and it was about a year after that you shifted to just getting out of horror. Was it a couple years?
Just about maybe yeah, 6 months to a year and stuff. I started having comedians I knew on. I started having non-show business friends on who, they're not in show business, but they are hams, so they'll come in and have a public talk with me. People that I'm friends with, and then getting people in other arenas of show business. Yeah, and it's just been a fantastic journey.
Yeah, I mean, and you invited me on that Facebook, the podcaster site club, whatever it is, right? That's so
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. So are you still living up in Northern California, basically?
Well, I moved here to Modesto 2 years ago. I was living in Redding for 6 years before that, which was just boring and awful. And I'm born and raised in San Mateo.
Oh yeah, that's right. San Mateo sounds like such a pretty town. I've never actually been there, but
It is a very pretty town, I mean, even with everything that I grew up on, that's basically just, apartment buildings for dot comers and stuff. It's
right.
always been a pretty town.
That's true because you're so. How far away are you from like Palo Alto and all that?
Probably 2 hours at least.
Oh, so that's why you get all those .comer people that live, but because
Yeah.
they can't afford to live in Palo Alto.
I wanted to live in Palo Alto, but that just wasn't in the cards. Maybe someday, if I hit lotto or something.
When your podcast is huge. So now tell me, what is your most unusual showbiz story, if you have one? Do you have any unusual showbiz story besides people stalking you at 2 a.m. On Facebook?
Unusual showbiz stories.
Yeah.
Like
Like at a convention or anything like that. Do you have anything that you remember that stands out in your brain?
I got great convention stories of meeting people, They've been mostly good. There's been a few jerks I've met here and there, you know, but like I remember like when I met Pee Wee Herman.
Oh,
Um, I met him in 2019. Um, I had seen him there 2 years before at Monster Palooza. He was honoring the legendary makeup artist V. Neal, who I've interviewed, and she's great. And so my mom and I were in line for 2 hours and 30 minutes. Now, I have metal in my leg from my car accident, and this is an awful strain on my leg, but it was worth it just to stand in line to meet Pee Wee Herman. And while we're in line, my mom, she's a Pisces and she loves to talk to just about anybody. And she struck up a conversation with this cute girl who was a horror fan. And, my mom had to go to the bathroom. And I said to her, I am so sorry if my mother is bothering you. I'm surprised she hasn't asked you what your favorite color is yet. You know, and so it's about to be my turn to go meet him, and he gets up off his chair and he says, "Okay, I know this is too much information, everybody, but I really have to go to the bathroom." And
Right.
everybody starts complaining, go, "Come on, we've been waiting for a while." And then he's like, "Okay, 10 more people." And then he goes back to sit down, and then it's my turn.
Right.
And I told him that we had a mutual friend, my friend Terry Bolo, who started the Groundlings in the early '70s. She's one of the people who started it and stuff. And so he was very sweet and just very gentlemanly, and just, my God, one of the menschiest guys I've ever met in my life. And he signed this 8x10 of him sitting on his talking chair on Pee Wee's Playhouse Cherry, and it was just really really awesome. It's one of my favorite celebrity meetings.
I've heard a lot of good things about Pee Wee. I was never like really a fan, like, because I didn't really follow his movies or anything like that. But I've heard a lot of good
Yeah.
things. A lot of comedians respect him, for some reason.
Hmm.
I've always heard that, right?
Oh yeah, because he was so different and not like anybody. And he developed this character at the Groundlings, and he was going up at the Comedy Store and the Improv and just working this character out, because the original concept of the character was Pee Wee was a bad stand-up comedian. That was the original aesthetic for Pee Wee and stuff. And like a lot of comedians just respected him, and just how he worked like a stand-up comedian even though he wasn't one. And he was embraced and loved by the punk rock community. They came to see his shows, and they really built the word up, because this is before the internet. And so the punk rock community really really built him up and stuff.
Oh, that's so cool. I did not know that. I recently met Pauly Shore at a party, and he was really nice. Have you ever met or interviewed him?
No, I'd be too nervous. He was a hero of mine growing up. My dad would take me to see his movies, and just we would just say, "Oh, the Weasel, man! Hey, buddy!" We used to do that all the time. I don't know. I'd be too nervous. And plus, he's comedy royalty. His mother just made everybody's career.
I know, I know. I was at a party and he was there, and I'd heard him on a podcast. I want to say it was Bill Maher. I'm not sure if it was Bill Maher or Mark Maron, but it was a really interesting podcast. And I thought, so I
Mhm.
went up to him and told him, and he was like, could not be sweeter, and
Nice.
it was a really nice day. I didn't have enough nerve to ask him to be on my podcast, so, but I next time, I always get,
Yeah.
I've asked so many people like to be on the pod, and they always say yes, and then it's just
Mhm.
like it's the hard follow up of sometimes it's at a crowded thing and I don't get their info, and so to go through their agent, it's like so
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had that
Yeah.
problem before.
Of course, I mean, you have to remember you're not the only one who asked them probably that day to go on their podcast, and it can be pretty jarring at times. Yeah. I mean, I stopped doing the representation thing about 5 years ago, in the middle of the pandemic. It got really weird. They got mad whenever I would like turn down clients because they just weren't in my wheelhouse and stuff.
Oh, I had
And
that
just
happen. I had that like with the comedians. Like I was interviewing a few, or no, not comedians, but more like the Little House on the Prairie people, which were great. And then
Yeah,
Harlan is their manager, who's a really great guy. And they
I
kept,
know Harlan.
yeah, he kept sending me all these people that I was trying to. I didn't want it to make the podcast just about those, certain era of
Yeah,
actors, So, and I'm more into music and stuff too, so that's why I'm kind of, I'm trying to focus in on. But no, actually, I want to. My theme is, reinventing yourself, and that's kind of like what you did. When you had the accident, you reinvented yourself as a podcaster, right?
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it's been a decade long of just, learning about myself, learning about life, and learning about show business and all that stuff. And it's funny, I keep thinking to myself, what could have happened when I was younger that I don't know, maybe I would have been better off, maybe I wouldn't have been better off. I guess timing is everything, and I learned everything at the right time.
So after you had your accident, I mean, this is kind of a personal question, but like, okay, so this tomorrow on Friday, my guest is Stacy Silberman, who she lost her son Max to a overdose. And
Oh,
I know, so sad. And her son Max was like a model, and he was doing really good. He was in like in a lot of rock videos and campaigns and stuff. Anyway, he overdosed on gosh, I forget what it was now. Maybe I want to say fentanyl. But so anyway, she wrote a book called "Stop Screaming at Your Kids." So we talked a lot about that, like how to deal with people who have these problems. So did you have to go? Did you go through any kind of? Did you go to like AA, or how did you work with your problem?
I didn't go through AA and all that stuff. I'll tell you, when I was at the heart of my drinking, I was homeless. I was staying with a friend of mine, and he had to go to mandatory NA meetings um, to um, because he had gotten in trouble with the law, and so he had to go to all these mandatory classes. And so I went with him for support. And while I was in there, I noticed something. This has probably been going on for decades now, but a lot of people who go to those meetings, they just they don't really want to be there because they're there under a court order as well, and just you can tell that so many of them are just full of it, and they're just there because they don't want to get in trouble, and they don't seem like that they've made attempts to better themselves. You see the way they dress and the way they act, and the arrogance is still there and stuff. And I was just really turned off by that. And I'd run into some of these people at the bar later and stuff. It was really weird,
Oh,
you know.
yeah.
And so like I don't know, I just never wanted to do that. I've wanted to like self-reflect and get through this myself. And they call it the dry drunk thing and stuff. I don't know, I haven't had any desire to drink alcohol since my accident because I know what I'm capable of when I'm drinking, and I just don't want to do those things anymore. It's
Good
not
for
worth
you.
it.
Good for you.
So I drink coffee now.
I know I'm kind of I'm not addicted to coffee. You know how I know? I do drink it like every morning. I have about at least 2 or 3 cups. But
Me too.
but when I'm sick, like I have a cold or whatever, for some reason my body goes, I don't want coffee, and I don't drink. And
Yeah.
so that's probably a comment on coffee, what it does to my body. But
Yeah.
or if I'm at a place where I can't get coffee, like say I'm up on a wilderness retreat or something and there's no coffee, I don't go through any kind of weird, withdrawals or anything. But it's just sort of a routine I
Mhm.
like in the morning. I like to have my coffee.
Yeah, I just love it. I got to slow down on it though because I got some heart issues from the accident and stuff, and so I got to pace myself. But yeah, I do love my coffee. When I was younger, you couldn't get me to drink coffee. I just thought it tasted nasty, maybe because I was drinking the wrong one.
Right?
And if I went to Starbucks, I would drink a mocha frap, and that's about it.
It's so funny. My friend was joking the other day. You always know where the AA meeting is, though, because there's all these people outside drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes.
Always.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember going to those meetings. I actually had some pretty good coffee at a couple of those meetings.
Right, right. So when I was on your podcast, we were talking about, gosh, Sam Kinison, right? And
Yes.
my friend that was listening said, "Oh, I have this really funny Sam Kinison story too." So he was telling me and stuff. But I mean, that was another guy that I never got to see like perform or anything like that. And do you have any other comic heroes besides, like Pee Wee Herman and Sam Kinison? Who are some of your other comic heroes?
I loved all the weird guys who were different. I loved Bobcat Goldthwait. I
Oh,
remember watching the Police Academy movies and just imitating him. I used to dress up as my favorite people that I looked up to and like imitate them while the movie was playing. And he was one of them and stuff. And I remember the night that his first HBO special aired. It was my mom's birthday, February 21st, and I found out recently it did air on February 21st, 1987. And I just remember my mom was out with her girlfriends having a good time. She came home, she passed out on the bed drunk. That was the first time I ever saw my mom drunk, and the last time for a lot of years because my mom was not a drinker when I was a
wow.
kid. And I just remember Bobcat saying the F word every other sentence on that special. And just my dad was just getting upset that here's me and my brother. We're just two young kids. I'm 3.5, he's 13, and we're just watching this and just laughing and stuff. And I have the special on VHS and I just watch it to this day and I love it and quote it. So Bobcat was a big one. I got into Andrew Dice Clay later and George Carlin. Rodney Dangerfield was always a favorite.
Well, I feel like George Carlin's kind of in a class of his own, because he's like so
Yeah,
intellectual to me. He,
yeah,
he was
I
like a
know.
he was like a thinker.
Yeah, I have this conversation with people all the time. When you're young, getting into Carlin, it's all about the bad words. But then as you get older, you realize how articulate he is and just how he makes sense of things.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of. I mean, they're all trailblazers once you think about it. Like, because a lot of especially now, comedians they say things that are in the zeitgeist that could be considered taboo to talk about, and they say it in a funny way so that it gets people to be able to. It's more palatable, like
Yeah.
gosh, what's his name? Not Chris Rock. Gosh, the other guy that got in trouble with the LGBT community, LGBTQ.
Chappelle, Dave
Yeah,
Chappelle.
because I hate to say it, I like Dave Chappelle. I know he's like, a lot of my friends are like, oh, he's too, but I think he's so funny.
He's hilarious, really hilarious.
Yeah, he's. I saw a special on Netflix, and I just so anyway, he was the one that got me thinking about that. That they bring up these topics that are considered taboo to talk about
Mhm.
in polite society, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to see Dave Chappelle. I think he's really good, and also I think Chris Rock is really good. He has this kind of a wholesome quality about him that makes some of the things he say. I don't know. There's something about his persona, the way he delivers that to me it always comes across kind of like wholesome. And I know that sounds so funny, but like he'll say something and that could be
Yeah.
seemed offensive, but the way he delivers it, it's not.
I think his early Cosby influence is a big part of that. I
Oh,
really think.
I didn't realize that Cosby was one of his idols.
Early, yeah, but Eddie was like his biggest, and of course Pryor, because they were the two ones that were doing it the way that he emulated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's good. Chris Rock is good, and the way he. Did you see his last special that he had on Netflix? It was a recent one where he talked about what happened at the Oscars. Did you see that one?
As I loved it, I was just laughing my ass off. You know,
Yeah.
the way he just went into the whole thing, and he says, the best part of the joke, and I finished it. It just had me on the floor.
Oh, I know. And then the punchline, which I won't say, about when he talks about, that punchline at the very end of the special where he said, "My mama said, Baba." That was a really good line.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh yeah, he's great. He's one of my favorites. And but like I said, my dad didn't really listen to comedians because he turned me on to a lot of music, right? But I had a babysitter that she was, obviously a lot older than me, and she was the one that said, "You got to listen to this George Carlin guy. He's really funny." So I got introduced to George Carlin from my older babysitter, and I just thought, wow, this is good. But and I had cousins that were into my older cousins were into Cheech and Chong. Did you ever were you ever into?
I'm a huge Cheech and Chong fan. I mean, huge. My parents had the Big Bamboo album. They smoked the rolling paper many years before, so it wasn't in there. But I interviewed Tommy Chong on the podcast
You did?
4 years ago. Yes.
Oh, that's God. I would love to get him. He just so I heard him and Cheech were on Bill Maher because did they write a
Yeah.
book or something or a new project they
They
have?
did a documentary. I saw it.
Yeah, yeah. Was it good?
Oh, I haven't seen the documentary, but I saw the episode of Bill
Oh,
Maher where they
yeah,
were
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. I have to see it too. But it was so funny but also Cheech actually, he seems he's super. I mean, they both are, but Cheech Marin's really well rounded. Like I heard he has this museum out here
Mhm.
in Riverside somewhere that's of all his artwork and someone else's, and I actually want to go
Right.
see it. You know, so and he seems like a really cool guy.
Yeah, I had Tommy. Yeah, so I had Tommy
You get
Chong on, and
Tommy.
I was considered cool for a week by my hometown of the Bay Area. They were just like, "Oh my God!" It was like when Marin interviewed Obama the first time. It was just like, "Oh my God, I can't believe Tommy Kovac is doing it. He's talking to Tommy Chong."
Wow, we'll have to talk later. I want to know how you got him on your podcast.
Okay, okay,
No, but yeah, that's like a real coup, a really coup for you, right?
huge, huge. I was just so overwhelmed, and all I did was let him talk because he was giving me all these great stories. Nothing that
Sure.
had really much relevancy to what I wanted to talk about, but I was happy to hear it.
I know I got this comment once. Gosh, oh, actually, it was when Rich was on my podcast, and I got a comment from not to me personally, but he had posted our podcast, and one of his friends or fans or whatever wrote under, "Well, I learned a lot about Kimbra," and so I was like, that was like a little dig, like I was maybe talking about myself too much. But I enjoy part of the reason why I tune into like Bill Maher or Bill Mark Maron is that I enjoy when they interject with their little stories about themselves because it's kind of boring just to hear about the guest over and over again. So that's
Mhm.
why I try to do that too. Like I interject little things because if someone's just going to ramble on and on, it can be kind of monotonous, in my opinion.
Yeah, when I so from the time I started to 2 years ago, it was always the career journey, and I started doing the nerd outs at the end of 23. Um, I had this podcast host who's a comedian in Boston named Ken Reed on my show. He has a podcast called TV Guidance Counselor. And what he does is he owns every TV guide known to man. I mean, he's a collector and he sends a PDF file to a celebrity and they talk about he sends the PDF file to a celebrity and they choose a TV guide from their childhood or adulthood or whatever, and they talk about all the programs that he or she watched, and they talk about how it was not culturally appropriate at the time or now or whatever. And it's an awesome podcast. And he was like nerding out with his guests, right? And I thought to myself, I should do something like that with my returning guests that I have on once a year because I'm starting to run out of things to talk about with them.
Yeah,
And
right.
so it started out that way, right? And then when I had Carney Wilson on last December, I was like, you know what? Her career, her life and career is so well documented. I don't want to have a boring interview
Sure.
of stuff that she's talked about before. I was like, I know I've heard her say, she loves movies and TV from her childhood and stuff. So I'm gonna nerd out with her, and that's what I did, and she friggin' loved it. I mean, it was just awesome, right? And then I did one recently with Lori Kilmartin. That was another story. She I mean, we had some fun, but I could just tell that it wasn't her jam, so to speak, right? And then when I have people like yourself, or I had this other person on earlier this year that I've become friends with, Kristen Hilaire, I've done half career journey and then the nerd out, and to make it a full episode. So I love doing that now, and I'm going to keep doing it.
I loved it. It was so refreshing. Plus, the person, the guest, like I didn't have to talk as much because you would ask me a lot of interesting questions. It's funny when I had Tuesday on, I asked her a lot about her father and songwriting, and she told Jeff
Yeah.
afterwards, like she goes, "I loved it because people always ask me about the horror films and they never ask about my dad," and she's real proud of her dad. So I like
Mhm.
being a little different, not just promoting. And then getting back to what we just said a minute ago, though, about the person that said, "Oh, I learned a lot about Kimbra," but on the other hand, like if I had someone like Tommy Chong on, I would just, I told my producer Craig, I was like, if I had somebody that I really, had this body of work and it was really hard to get on, of course I'm just gonna like let them talk forever. You don't
Yeah.
want nobody wants to hear about me if I've got, let's say Meryl Streep is on my podcast, right?
Yeah. He's got stories. Tommy Chong's got stories.
Yeah, I'll bet. And it's a surprise that he can remember most of them, because if he was stoned.
Yeah.
So now I got an email from you saying, now I couldn't believe how many guests have you had in total?
As of yesterday, 2,451.
Because that was a 42-page email, I think. Wait, if I'm not wrong, hold on. It was 42 pages. I was like, that's the list of your guests was so long, you know?
Yeah,
And
I
and
had a
go ahead.
yeah, I had a person tell me an email once. Sending that full list out is kind of weird.
Well, I didn't print the whole thing. I was just like, what? I'm like
Yeah.
42 pages? Oh my gosh. So what are your plans in the future for the podcast? Like what are some of the future guests? How far ahead? How often do you do the podcast for one thing?
Sometimes 5 days a week, sometimes less, sometimes two or three interviews in one day, which I try not to do anymore because I am exhausted by the end of the day. When I was in my 30s starting, I could do that a lot more, but I can't anymore. So I try to plan at least one a day. You know, it just depends, and I gotta say, since the strike happened in 23, it's been really hard getting people booked consistently and stuff because um also too, I mean, there's more podcasts out there. So many people are inundated with podcast requests, like we were talking about before and stuff, so I try to book whoever I can as much as possible, and for the future, I mean, I love, doing what I do, and just I love where I'm at. I just want to keep it in my little cult following bubble here and just keep talking to amazing people. I'm ready for whatever the higher power hands to me.
So now, right now, people can only find it on YouTube. Are you trying to get it onto other platforms, or do you want to, or what's your thoughts about that?
I mean, I mean, a lot of podcasters have had trouble with YouTube for various reasons. I've never had any trouble that was major with YouTube. I've never had censorship problems and stuff. I had a couple misunderstandings over copyright of images
Hmm.
and stuff. And there's been a couple of times when a person's phone went off during the interview and
Okay.
some music was playing, and I had to go and edit that. But as far as that goes, I've never had any trouble with YouTube. No, I like to have it on YouTube because it's easy for people to just go there and stuff. Whereas if you're going for the apps and stuff like Spotify or whatever, it can be a little bit harder for people who are not technologically challenged. So I like just doing it for YouTube.
Well, you keep it so simple. I mean, for you, which is good. Like,
Yeah.
YouTube and no video, because, like, I had this one guest that she's a friend of mine, but she was like, I don't want to be on camera, and I'm like, but we do film on
Yeah.
camera,
I run into those. Yeah, and I'm like, okay, well, you're in luck. This is not a camera podcast.
I know, believe me, there's times, especially after I was on yours, I was like, why do I have to, because as a woman, I mean, I don't know, I don't have to do this, but I gotta do my hair, I do my makeup.
I'm sure you're gorgeous when you get out of bed, Kimbra. I mean, I don't think you have anything to worry
Oh,
about.
you're so sweet. I have a funny story that I was telling someone. You reminded me when you said that. I was hiking, sometimes, not so much lately, but I used to go hiking a lot in Studio City, and run. I don't know if you know Fryman Canyon. You're not familiar with Studio City that much, are you?
I know Studio City a little bit, but not like specifically. What'd you call it, Ryman Canyon?
Yeah, there's
Canyon?
a place called Fryman Canyon. I won't say where it is because it's already too inundated. I'll tell you privately.
Okay.
But it's a canyon where a lot of people go hiking. And if I didn't get up, if I didn't do it first thing in the morning without getting ready or and any, like even brushing my hair, sometimes I wouldn't do it. So I'm like, I roll out of bed, I'm going there. And there's a really hard part in the very beginning. And so I see this guy walking down the hill, and it's a really nice suit, like a look like Armand. And you don't see people in suits on Fryman Canyon. And I was
Yeah.
like, that guy kind of looks like Tom Cruise, but I don't know. And so I was like, and of course I was like at my worst, so I'm like, I don't want to see him. So then he walks by me and I'm like, it gives me that big Tom Cruise smile, I'm like, it was Tom Cruise. I'm like, why did I have to see him on the day that I didn't even brush my hair? But it was so funny because there's a lot of studios around that area. So I'm thinking that he probably was, taking a break, like a meeting. He seems like the kind of guy that would do something like that. Like, I'm going to go walk up Fryman Canyon while we're taking a break.
amazed that he even didn't even have an entourage. I mean, a guy at that level,
I
wow.
know, I know. You see a lot of people at this canyon, like the famous people, because there's a lot of famous people that live around there, you know. So it's a great place. I like to go hiking because it eases, it kind of it's cathartic for me, like it helps me think about things.
Yeah, Kevin Nealon has a show on YouTube. It's like 20 minutes long where he goes hiking with a celebrity friend of his.
Oh, that's
And
exciting.
it's always the same trail. I don't know where it is specifically because it's got to be private, I guess. But yeah, he takes them hiking and he interviews them while they're hiking and stuff. And sometimes they'll like see like they'll be walking, there'll be like fans saying hi, how you doing and stuff. He had Marin on there, and Marin was winded within less than 5 minutes. This was like around the time that he got diagnosed with the heart issue that he had, and the high cholesterol and stuff. So he had to go vegan, and so it was hilarious just seeing that. And then he's talked about it on other podcasts since.
I know. Well, I haven't heard about that podcast. I'll have to check it out.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of celebrities that go there. And then there's another one in Hollywood that I don't go to much anymore. That's called Runyon Canyon. That one's like really steep, so you see,
Yeah,
it's a real LA thing to do. Like, we're going to go hiking.
yeah.
You'll be impressed about this. I'm not going to say the canyon because I don't want to, in case she gets people that go there, but on a hike, it's not any of the ones I've mentioned. I saw Jamie
Mhm.
Lee Curtis and she was walking
Oh,
in front of me, right? And
yeah.
she wasn't on the phone, but I didn't want to bug her because I was with friends. And a lot of times people go hiking just to get away. And it's a very remote canyon that not very many people know about. So I think she lived near there, but I was like, oh my God, it's Jamie Lee Curtis, And now,
Yeah.
since I was not into the horror films like you were. I mean, I liked some of the classic horror films, but I'm not a total horror fanatic. But I'm really a big fan of Jamie Lee Curtis's now because since she's done all these kind of different movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I know a lot of people didn't like that movie that I know, but I did.
Yeah.
I thought it was really unique and innovative.
Hmm.
I didn't totally get it at first, but I just thought it was really creative. And I've heard her on podcasts, from talking about the movie, and she said like when she got the script, she was like, I didn't understand it, and then like her assistant was a big knew about the two Daniels, and her assistant said, whatever they want you to do, you do it, and that's why
Yeah.
she did it, and it kind of didn't resurrect her career because but it really made her even work more, you know.
Yeah, I mean the first I saw her in her mainstream movies before I saw the horror movies. I have always loved Trading Places, even that bad one she did with Travolta, Perfect and stuff.
Mhm.
And I always had a crush on her because I love women who are androgynous looking. I'm just totally turned on by it. And it wasn't until I was like 11, 12 that I discovered the horror movies that she was in and stuff. Halloween and Terror Train and
Or
Prom Night and all of that stuff. I love those. And so yeah, she's starting to embrace being a horror scream queen a little bit now. She did like a Halloween 45th anniversary meet and greet a couple of years ago, and I heard the turnout was huge, hundreds of people there.
oh yeah, I mean, she seems like she really appreciates, like from this podcast I heard, maybe it was Mark Maron or was it Bill Maher? God, those are the only two I listened to lately, and so I keep forgetting who was on who. But she was, I think it was Mark Maron because Christopher Guest was on. Yes, it was Mark Maron because Christopher Guest was on soon afterwards, and he was promoting Spinal Tap 2. But just
Yes.
talking, he seems like a very talented guy, but very he could when on the podcast he was very serious.
Yeah, he has that kind of like smugness about him that comes from probably, growing up in New York. And I don't know if he was Ivy League or not, but maybe Ivy League adjacent or something.
I don't think he was Ivy League, but he went to some college that and eventually he met the guy that did the blonde guy that's in all the movies with him.
Michael McKean.
Yeah, Michael McKean, yeah. But I don't think they went to college together. But Michael McKean, I think, went to a really good college that he and he got his start at college. But anyway, he was just talking about that, and I thought, it's funny how Christopher it's what a great marriage they have though, because they've been married what 30 years or something, and
40-ish. Yeah.
to make that last in in this world, but especially if you're both in show business,
Hmm.
that's
I know it's very rare. I think the
admirable.
key. I think the key to their marriage is that they've never worked together.
Maybe that's true. That's a good point. Hey, so I want to ask you, so is there anything else you wanted to add about your podcast? What do you is there anything you want to say about it, at all that people maybe misunderstand about it? Or I think we've covered everything. Like, you're branching out now, you're not just a horror thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, people can go to the description of my YouTube channel, and I have everything laid out there and stuff, which I should have done a long time ago. But I think people, are both delighted and terrified of the thought of coming on or listening to it based on that. But at least them, are real about it and stuff. They can go there and check it out. I talk about how authenticity is the key word for the show, and I basically just talk about what I do, and take a listen, you'll be entertained, and hopefully, you'll learn something. If, the guest I have is that great, they'll teach you something, and it's just it's fun.
Yeah, I remember when I first was checking your podcast out, and I laughed because the first part it says, "This podcast is sponsored by no one." I was like,
Yes,
I
I
know.
started doing that about 4 years ago, right? And I did it with less enthusiasm at the time, and then the last year or two, I just been doing it with a lot of gravitas and gusto. And
Get it
people
real.
love, yeah, people love it. They're just like, that is so hilarious. I'm like, yeah, well, I want everybody to be disarmed and just have a good time, from the moment it starts.
Now, would you be opposed to getting a sponsor if someone approached you?
Kinda, because like I've heard stories about certain podcasters with advertisers. They like, um, they want to do like a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of a deal of like, they want you to interview certain people that like, are big contributors to their product and stuff. And just like I'm just not up for that,
It's funny because
really.
I listened to I haven't listened to it in a little while, but I listened to the two Danas, Dana Carvey and Dana.
Yeah, it's David Spade.
Yeah, oh, sorry, not the two Danas, David Spade and Dana Carvey, and they work well together. I like David Spade. He seems like a really cool guy, and I've heard great things about Dana Carvey actually, because a friend of mine worked on some movies with him. But they have a lot of sponsors, and I'm like, I'm always wondering, like what's the line you got to walk with that, right? They have
My
certain ones.
dad's Yeah, my dad's business teacher in high school was Dana Carvey's dad.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, Dana Carvey talks a lot about his dad on that podcast because I guess he had some issues with his dad, and he's pretty vocal
yeah.
about it.
My dad can confirm that his dad had no sense of humor. He was a very serious guy. He very rarely ever cracked a smile when teaching and stuff. But yeah, like yeah, I went to San Mateo High School, and my dad, my mom, my uncles, they all went there and stuff. San Mateo High School is a very famous high school. Uh,
Oh, that's right.
Merv,
We were going to talk about it. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you about San Mateo because you were mentioning it, but a lot of famous people went there, including yourself.
No, I'm not. No, no. I'll tell you who's famous that went there. Merv Griffin
Oh,
went there. Chris Christopherson, Barry Bostwick.
wow.
He spoke at one of our graduations when I was there, and I met him years ago. Alicia Silverstone and my mom was in the same class with Dennis Haysbert. They've known each other since kindergarten.
No, refresh my memory. Who's Dennis Haysbert again?
He was the president on the series 24 with Kiefer Sutherland.
Oh, okay. I never watched 24, but I do. I know about the show. I just never watched it.
He was in Major League, and he was in Waiting to Exhale with Whitney Houston, and he was in Navy SEALs, a lot of stuff. And he's been doing it since the late 70s. And I have a picture with him when I was 5. He came down for a reunion, and I got a picture with him.
So, why do you think so many famous people came out of San Mateo High? I mean, what is it about? Like, it's almost as like Fairfax High or Beverly Hills High. So many famous people. Why San Mateo?
Uh, Partially, I think because they got the best drama program of any high school in the state of California. That's got to be a reason.
Mm,
And also, too, it's all coincidence. I mean, you meet actors, they come from places like New Jersey, Chicago, New York, Boston, Arizona. It's just it's all a coincidence, really.
yeah, whenever I find out somebody cool, like I went to Cal State Fullerton, and whenever I find out someone cool like came from Fullerton, I'm always like Jackson Brown and Jeff Buckley. I'm like, really? Because Fullerton's so whoa. No, I like Fullerton. It's just
Yes.
that when you don't, it's kind of mainstream, nondescript Orange County part of it, and it's like I
Mhm.
can't believe someone hip and cool came out of it. Like,
Yeah.
then I found out Austin Butler's from Anaheim. I was like, wow, go Anaheim.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
it's been really great having you on. I have to actually get going as usual, but so I'm hoping to come back on your podcast soon, but I'll have to get
Yes.
prepped. I have to get prepped, like don't be freaked out because you're going to be asking me all kinds of questions, right?
Well, we're going to talk about film and television. That's where we left off on the nerd out and stuff. And it'll be fun like the last time, and it won't be as long, of course, because it's just film and television. But yes, I'm so happy that I could be here with you today, and
Oh,
I look forward to having you back on. So thank you, Kimbra.
you're welcome. I'm so glad you came on because I wanted people to see the man behind the voice.
Yeah.
And because you're so lucky, like I said, you're all audio. So I wanted to see really is a man. He's not an AI thing. It's really Tommy Kovac.
Yeah, if you go on YouTube and see the interviews I've done on my friend Linda Marcus Smith's podcast, right? 3 of those you'll see me on my old laptop, and there's a better color on the Zoom.
Oh
So I
yeah,
apologize for this.
he's not this white.
No, not this white. I am white, but not this white.
That'd be funny. A funny title for something. I'm not this white. Talk about because we were talking about that on your podcast. Like I said, so am I? How politically incorrect are we supposed to be or not? And you were like, I don't worry about that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure, and I know I'll be talking to you soon. And this won't come out for a couple of weeks, but I will let you know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kimbra.
You're welcome. Bye, Tommy. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Candid.